There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch, Michael Byler.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon. Want to welcome all you folks that are coming over from Duty Ron's show. Appreciate you guys. I also appreciate Duty Ron for sending me your audience. It's very noble of you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. You know, folks, the Bryan Kohberger case, we know that they gave the defense nearly 6 months to prepare for the hearings, actually, the probable cause hearings that will start on June 26th. And I just did a show the other night with Professor Mike Geary and talking about what is the defense doing with all of this time? How are they using their time to further the ends of their job, which is to create doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, that old acronym BARD, B-A-R-D, beyond a reasonable doubt. That's what the defense is looking to create. So in being fair that the defense is using all this time and trying to create doubt, you might ask, or I would ask, certainly ask, what is the prosecution doing right now? Are they resting on their laurels? Are they resting on the information they have right now? Are they resting and just fine-tuning the evidence they have now? Or are they aggressively going out there and building a better and better case? We, as content creators here on YouTube, we don't have the inside information, and neither does the broadcast media, neither does the print media have the inside information on what's in that case folder. So I would just speculate that maybe 10% of the evidence that they have in this case has been turned over. So a good 90% of the evidence, I personally believe, from having done this business, investigate homicides, run big cases like this, I believe they have tractor trailers full of evidence more in this case. So it's sort of, when I hear people even in the chat and stuff saying, oh, if that's all they have, he's going to beat this case. Trust me, that's not all they have, all right? I believe they have tons more evidence, and that's what tonight's show is going to be about. How much more evidence do they have? How are they fine-tuning this evidence? How are they fine-tuning their expert witnesses to do a presentation that's expert? Because a lot of the evidence in this case is going to have to be explained by experts, so that jurors, regular John Q and Susie Q juror, can understand the evidence. Because it's not every day that we deal with cell phone tower pings and DNA and familial DNA and touch DNA and blood DNA. That's not every day we deal with that. So that needs to be explained. So if the prosecution has these expert witnesses, won't the defense also have experts that can refute what the prosecution says? That's why it's so important for the case detectives and the FBI agents and all of the police personnel who are going to testify to understand the evidence, to understand what it means, and to be prepared when they get up on the stand and they raise their right hand and swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth. They have to have a good understanding of this case. And the preparation from this case is so important. I can't even stress it enough, because don't forget, and I'm not trying to put down anyone involved in this case, this is the first murder in Moscow in 7 years. So how experienced is that man you see on the screen? Bill Thompson. He obviously has been around. You can see just by looking at his appearance. However, he doesn't have a great deal of homicide experience. He may have a great deal of experience as a prosecutor. However, there is no bigger case, no case that takes more expertise on this earth than to prosecute a homicide. To talk about all those things tonight, I have my co-host with me, retired NYPD detective and straight out of Brooklyn, Phil Grimaldi. How you doing tonight, Phil?
I'm doing pretty good, Billy. And I just want to say once again, thank you to all the listeners that came over from Duty Ron Show. We greatly appreciate you guys. Thank you, Duty Ron, for channeling over your listeners to us. I think we have a lot to talk about tonight, Bill.
No, absolutely. Because you know something, I like you and probably Duty Ron and all conscientious content creators. We read a great deal of the chat and the comments. I actually enjoy it. I can't read it all because I would probably do nothing else but answer chat, but I enjoy reading it. I enjoy interacting with our audience. And I also realize by reading that how wonderful and how informed and how much our audience appreciates us. So I just want to thank them for that while I'm going on about this.
You know, Billy, you in your open, you were talking about whether or not the prosecution is going to relax or is going to rest based on the information that they already have. I think it's going to be quite the opposite. There's going to be a race to find out as much information about movements of Bryan Kohberger, obviously before the murders and post the murder time till the time when he was taken into custody. There's going to be a treasure trove of information that's available to investigators to find out what his movements may have been, searches that he'd done on his computer. We've gone over all the different things that we think. And again, there's going to be both sides. Prosecution is going to be doing their due diligence. They have an obligation to present the best case possible when you're going to charge someone with a capital crime, especially capital crime of 4 murder, 1 murder first degree charges. And the defense is going to be out there trying to come up with some exculpatory evidence that could exonerate Kohberger in this case. So again, both teams are probably working very hard to conduct as much investigative information as possible. I think that the prosecution, you talked about the prosecutor there. I believe his name was Bill Thompson. How much trial experience does he have? Never mind murder cases, that there hasn't been a murder in 7 years in Idaho, but as the district attorney or the prosecutor in that jurisdiction, how many cases has he actually tried? How many times has he gone to trial with a case and seen it through from beginning to end? That's going to be very important. Now, I know he's going to have a second chair. He's going to have possibly an outside assistant from another jurisdiction that would maybe third chair the prosecution. But again, those are very, very good points that you brought up, Billy. How much experience does he have in the courtroom? Because as you know, the courtroom is a very, very tough battle to wage. It's not easy to get points across. The judge can overrule you, or there could be objections, different things like that. And it's very, very, you're in the spotlight, so to speak. It's very difficult to be effective in a courtroom unless you have that experience. You've been through it before. It's like anything else. Practice makes perfect, as they say. But the one thing he is going to have on his side is he's going to have a tremendous investigative team. You had the state police, you had the local police in Moscow, and you had the FBI, which is the largest law enforcement agency in the United States with the best crime lab. So he is going to have a ton of help. I'm sure that they did plenty of work, and there's probably much more to follow.
I just wanted to say, I think that when Bill Thompson will have the state attorney general's office prosecutors or prosecutor helping him with this case. He's not going to be the only lawyer for the state, so he's going to have some help, and well, as he should. This is a huge case. There's 4 murders involved here, so yeah, he'll have help. So let's get right down to it. Last week, we had Michael Vecchione on, who's a former Brooklyn assistant district attorney, the chief of the Homicide Bureau. And we asked him, look, when we do a case like this, or when we talk about any case, we try to stay in our lane. And what our lane is homicide investigation and cops. We're coppers, all right? Investigative cops. And, just so you don't know, and I'll teach you something here too, the word cop, you may hear it and think, oh, that's disparaging. That's not a nice term. And it actually is fine. Some people may think it's disparaging, but it actually stands for constable on patrol. And it comes from England. It comes from Great Britain. So I'm fine with someone calling me a cop. And I even use the term copper myself because I'm proud of it. I'm proud of it. So if someone uses the term cop, don't think it's disparaging.
Absolutely.
Other terms that have been used, Mike Geary had used, exculpatory evidence. Exculpatory evidence is evidence that tends to clear the defendant. Conversely, inculpatory evidence is evidence that tends to prove the defendant's guilt. So we're learning some new words here too, right? We have Professor Geary on. He starts introducing new words and everything. I love to learn new stuff, so I just thought that I would introduce that. So tonight you learned cop, exculpatory, and inculpatory. All right?
Billy, I had heard exculpatory many times before. The inculpatory, is that how you pronounce it? That's how you say it?
Inculpatory.
Inculpatory. And it makes sense. Exculpatory, inculpatory is going to prove guilt. But the thing that I was kind of enlightened, I did know it, but I wasn't really so aware of it because I'm always on the prosecution side, is that the defense has to turn over. If they come up with an eyewitness, let's say, or they find some specific evidence that they can say that this is going to prove our client innocent, exculpatory evidence, they have to also turn that over to the prosecution. I did remember that, but I wasn't that aware of it. So I thought that was a good point that was brought up on the other night's show.
Tom Cusinelli, a retired NYPD captain, had to throw in another term. And while we're on terms, I'll just throw it in there. Quid pro quo basically means, I'll make it very simple. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
Yeah.
That's basically what
that reminds me of Hunter Biden for some reason. I don't know why that came to my head, but
quid pro quo. That's Latin, obviously. And I never took Latin, but I always knew some of these terms. Anyway, let's get down to it. Classroom is over. One of the things that Michael Vecchione said when we said, Mike, if you were the prosecutor on this case, how would you start this case? And he said in his opening statement, he would go right to DM and he would go right to the eyeball witness. An eyeball witness seeing someone who may have been the killer with bushy eyebrows and wearing a mask, walking out and the sliding glass doors on the second floor there. That's where he would start his case. So with that in mind, DM also, there's no doubt she's going to be a witness for the prosecution. And what does that mean? That means the defense is going to grill her also, right? But as a witness for the prosecution, they're going to have to really prepare her. You think she's traumatized by this? You bet she is. But is she going to be a good witness for the prosecution, or is she going to be no help at all? Because she potentially is a smoking gun type witness. Phil?
Well, first off, I agree with you and I agree with Mike. I do believe that she should be the first person to testify in this case. And I think that the initial stages of her her examination, her testimony would be, who are you? She would state her name. Where do you live? She would state that she was living at that time at that location. What was your lifestyle like? I was a college student. I lived with the victims in this case, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, and the other two, Gonzalez and Madison Mogan. I forgot the names offhand. Forgive me for that. But she would start to give face to the victim. She would tell about the lifestyle of what was going on before this night of this horrible incident. And then again, like you said, Billy, she went through an extremely traumatic experience. I think that now with some counseling, perhaps the fact that the threat is over, that the person that we believe is responsible is in custody, and we can now maybe rest a little easy that, she's not going to be harmed or anything like that, but super traumatic experience. She will be able to put the face on the victims. That's one good point that I think Mike Vecchione brought up. The other point is that she's going to solidify the timeline. We know that there was video evidence of the vehicle last seen in the rear of the location at about 4:04 a.m. Started a little before 4. It was picked up on video surveillance 4 different times. The last time was about 4:04. And she is claiming some way, somehow they can figure out that at 4:17 a.m. is when the perpetrator exited through the rear sliding doors, walked past her and exited through the rear sliding doors. That's also going to establish it. It solidifies the timeline. It gives a face to the victims, but it's also going to solidify that bloody shoe print that was found by the back sliding glass door. So those 3 things can be laid out just by DM's testimony right there. And perhaps maybe other stuff that we don't know that was revealed in her interview.
Absolutely. One of the things that Ashley Banfield was talking about the other night, we played it the other night, was the statements made on this horrific murder happened on November 13th. On November 17th, Ashley Banfield interviewed the coroner of Latah County. And she, first of all, I don't know if in fact she was there for the processing of the crime scene, because that probably took 16, 18, 24 hours. I doubt that the coroner was there for the whole time. Death investigators need to be experienced, and they have a certain protocol. The death investigators from the medical examiner's office, they don't do their work till the crime scene detectives have completed theirs. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? The reason they don't do their work simultaneously or during the time that the crime scene detectives are doing their work is because they have to move the bodies. They have to disturb the bodies. So therefore, the crime scene detectives have to complete all their work, taking photographs, taking notes of the condition of the body, using lasers that note the condition of the body, photograph, collect blood evidence, blood spatter, make note of it, evidence that's on the scene. So all of the work that the crime scene detectives do has to be completed before the medical legal investigators get to do their job. And the medical legal investigators have a protocol to follow. And one of the things they do, of course, is to take the body temperature. And they also note the condition of the body. Is the body, the stab wounds would be quite obvious. The blood would be quite obvious. But they would also take note of something called rigor mortis. But based on the fact that the medical legal investigators probably didn't get to touch the bodies till after 4 hours, they were there for longer than 4 hours. The bodies were probably out of rigor mortis and into something called livor mortis, which is lividity, which is the blood pools to the dependent side and actually looks like a body has a sunburn on it based on the lividity. So all of these things that medical legal death investigators will take note of, they actually may be the ones also that may take the scrapings from underneath the fingernails. Or the crime scene detectives wrap the hands in paper bags to secure that potential evidence, and then it's done by the pathologist in the medical examiner's office.
Billy, what you're describing is obvious that, I think a lot of time was spent inside that crime scene. It probably went over days. So I doubt that the coroner was present for all of that. When you talk about the collection of evidence, that's going to be something that is going to be very, very, pinpointed at the trial. Prosecution is going to put forth, the way evidence was collected, and defense is going to try and, impeach how it was collected. Was it done properly? Was there something that was compromised? Could cross-contamination have taken place with different pieces of evidence? So those are some of the things that I think that are going to be very, very important testimony at the trial. Chain of evidence, when a piece of evidence is recovered, I think that's very, very important as well. When we recover a piece of evidence, we safeguard it. We put it in some type of a container, whether it be a plastic or a paper bag or whatever it is. We have evidence bags in the police department, and then we sign it and we deliver it either to the laboratory or we turn it over to the property clerk, whatever it is. All the different phases of the evidence, there's a thing called the chain of custody. We make sure that that's kept because evidence obviously is got to be kept pristine for the purposes of trial. So again, there could be some breaks in that chain of custody, the chain of evidence. That was the things that the prosecution is going to be very solid on, to say that, the proper protocols were followed and the evidence was kept at this location. And when it was examined, it went from the location to the lab, and the lab officer opened it, documented it, cataloged it, examined it, and then it was put back in a safe place, for future examination. All of those things people don't realize are very, very important, because if one of those things is not followed properly, again, you could create a doubt. And that's what the job of the prosecution is, to prevent any kind of a doubt. We want to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, as you talked about earlier, Billy. So those are the things that the defense team would try to, impeach testimony in a trial.
I'm going to play a little bit of this from the other night from Ashley Bay.
Comfortable to hear this because we're talking about innocent kids who were killed in that home back in October. And not only that, this is evidence that likely will come out in court at some point. Whether it will be germane to who the killer is or not, that remains to be seen. But it could be evidence nonetheless. With that in mind, let me let you know what these sources have told News Nation. Number one, they told us that the victims, Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, were killed first, and they confirmed that Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle were killed on the second floor afterwards. And these are some of the other details.
What she's referring to, Ashley Banfield, and we covered this in sort of great depth the other night with Mike Geary, but she's referring to two sources of information she has that are unidentified, sources close to the investigation. She describes them as. I don't trust that at all as to be accurate, because who are these people? We don't know. But a broadcaster is taking this as gospel and putting it out there as truth. And people criticize us also. Oh, you put it out there too. We're giving a little addendum here. We don't know if the information that she's receiving is accurate. Should we ignore it? Well, you decide that. We're trying to give you accurate information based on what we know about criminal investigation.
Billy, it sounds like that she believes it to be true. That's why she broadcast it. So again, like you said, it's not being reported by law enforcement. It's an unnamed source, so it has to be taken with a grain of salt. However, it could be likely. It does sound likely to me that the first two victims were killed up on the third floor, and on the way out encounters the second two victims and then makes the exit. That does sound likely to me. So again, we don't know it 100% for certain. She's reporting it, and it sounds like she does believe it to be true.
That they have released. They said that Ethan Chapin was killed in the doorway of Xana Kernodle's room before the killer set upon Xana. The sources say that it appeared Ethan had stepped partly into the hallway where the attack may have begun. These sources also say that Ethan Chapin suffered a slash to the neck. But I have to say that both of these details are in direct conflict with what the coroner had originally told us right here on this program exclusively. And also, they conflict directly with what police have said as well. And those two facts that are in conflict are that all of the victims were in their beds, according to police and the coroner. And according to the coroner, all of the injuries were stab wounds and not slash wounds. So I just want to play for you exactly what it was the coroner said in her words. Were any of them slashed? Were any of their necks cut? Or were these all puncture wounds?
Well, it was a pretty large knife, so it's really hard to call them puncture wounds. And they were definitely stabbings.
Can you tell me, when you say that they might have been sleeping, were they found in beds?
Yes.
So those were the facts that.
You know, I said it the other night on the show with Michael Geary. I don't think that you can trust the accuracy of the coroner on the scene. Also, because if you've ever seen a body that's filled with blood that's been cut with a knife, it's very difficult to examine the wounds on the scene. In fact, the pathologists, when they examine the wounds, they will at some point, after the bodies are photographed and everything, they will at some point clean the wounds so that they can see exactly what type of wound it is. So for the coroner, who also got, folks, again, I'm not putting this lady down. She's an RN. She's a registered nurse. That's great. And she has a law degree. She's also a lawyer. But is that really the qualifications to make the judgment call on the stabbings at the scene of the crime? I don't trust this information. I really don't.
I agree with you, Billy. And again, like you brought up, when an autopsy is conducted, the body could be obviously much more exactly examined. They'll be able to tell the depth of the wounds. They'll be able to tell which wounds could be considered superficial, meaning that it didn't hit any major arteries, didn't hit any organs. It may have just gone into skin or muscle and could cause some bleeding. However, would not be a death blow, so to speak. But if you have an incident where one of the injuries, one of the knife wounds punctures a lung, punctures a main artery, punctures a main organ, which would cause excessive bleeding and cause a person to lose consciousness within 15 or 20 seconds and perhaps expire in a minute or two. Those are the things that would be explained at autopsy. And when you get that autopsy report, it would talk about all the different wounds. If there's a dozen wounds, it would explain that 1 through 7 are considered superficial. The rest are considered kill wounds and different things of that nature. And before we went on the air, we talked about there would also be a drawing showing exactly on the body where the wounds were. So again, all of those things are done at autopsy.
Lou Lemoracco, Bill Thompson, 30 years as Latah County prosecutor. He will get the job done. Much respect and love to that man. Multiple awards, very stand-up guy with integrity. You know, Lou, I don't disparage this man. I don't doubt that he's an excellent prosecutor, but the fact is he doesn't get a lot of murders. If you get a murder every 7 years and he's been there for 30 years, then he gets less than 5. He's prosecuted less than 5 murders in 30 years, if that's the pace of them.
Absolutely, Billy. And wasn't what we said, and in my opinion, I'm sure I could speak for you as well. We didn't mean to disparage him. We're just talking about how difficult it is to get up there and prosecute a quadruple capital murder case. It's not an easy thing to do. I'm sure he's going to be competent at it. I am sure he's going to get a lot of help. We're just pointing out that it's not something that you have every day. And I've only seen in my career, I had a triple homicide. I don't know how many triples you've seen or quadruples, Bill, but I've never seen a quadruple. So again, these are rare occurrences, and this is going to have, it's a high profile case. Obviously, it's a capital murder case, and it's a quadruple homicide. So it has major spotlight on it, so to speak. So it's going to be difficult, but I'm sure with the right help, he's going to do fine.
Emily, 53, that coroner was out of line. Who gave her the authority to speak on an active?
Absolutely.
You're 100% correct, Emily, 53. And Cheryl, same. I can't believe that the coroner gave this interview. And it was 4 days after the murder that she gave this interview. You guys are 100%. I agree. I would never see the New York City chief medical examiner going and giving an interview ever, really, ever.
post conviction, maybe, or post trial, perhaps. But again, it's so funny that they brought that up. I've been meaning to say that for the past several shows. When did you ever? I was going to ask you, but when did you ever see a medical examiner or a coroner give an interview a few days into a homicide like this? It was very, very unusual for that to take place. And again, everybody wanted their 15 minutes of fame. I get it. I don't think, though, that you could take for gospel what she did say in that interview. We talked about it, Billy, before we went on the air, about how some wounds could be considered a slash or a stab, but you really can't define them until the autopsy's done and a medical investigator does a complete autopsy, and then you can describe the wounds. Sometimes a person could be fighting and it could look like a slash while the person was trying to stab. So again, a little bit misconstrued there, a little bit confusing, I guess. But again, that was a great point that those two.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, guys, for the point there. One of the things that everyone talked about. In fact, early on in the investigation, I don't know if you remember, some of these broadcast channels were saying, "Oh, there's only 101 pieces of evidence." Where did they get the authority to talk about how many pieces of evidence there is, and that's a bad thing? Like, that really pissed me off when people were saying that. And this was, of course, before the arrest. There's only 101. Like, oh, should they just start ripping things off the wall to satisfy broadcast media that they have more evidence than the 101 pieces that they were unsatisfied with?
Billy, that was reported, taken from the crime scene itself. Now, that was early on. I am sure that there's multiple other different pieces of evidence with regard to what was recovered over at his apartment at the Washington State University off-campus apartment, maybe in his vehicle, maybe at his home in Pennsylvania. So again, that doesn't concern me. And it actually sounds like a lot of evidence if you take from a crime scene. You say there was 4 different bodies, probably in 2 locations. So that's like 50 pieces of evidence from each location if we want to divide it up evenly. Again, that doesn't seem like a little bit of evidence. It doesn't seem like an overwhelming amount, but it's a decent amount of evidence, Bill.
Absolutely. Folks, this is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like this show from a police perspective, please go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to share us with your friends and family and make comments, we appreciate all that, and we love reading your comments and answering them back. We also have a Patreon with 3 different levels if you want to support us financially. And you can see the folks in the green font. We have a YouTube channel memberships, and we really appreciate our fans, our subscribers, our friends, and they're very supportive. And our channel keeps growing, and we're hoping one day to be as big as Duty Ron. He's helping us get there. Folks, I wanted to also talk about, when people get concerned about the evidence, is that all they have right now? We have never, and we have spoken about this numerous times, the autopsy evidence is not out yet, right? It's never been released, right? So there can be considered to be 4 separate crime scenes. And what do I mean by that? 4 bodies. There's 4 separate bodies. That's 4 separate crime scenes. So all of the work that the pathologist done, who, by the way, a pathologist is a medical doctor. That word coroner is not, there should be a system in the United States that we only use the medical examiner system. The coroner system is not a good system. And Barbara Butcher, who has been on Duty Ron's show 100 times, she's been on this show. She's a real expert on that. She was the chief of staff of the New York City office of the chief medical examiner. She really talks down the coroner system. It's not a good system. The medical examiner system is the most preferred system because the people you're dealing with are medical doctors who do this all the time, all right? So the medical doctor who performed these autopsies, and that, by the way, is where a lot of the evidence is also collected. Evidence underneath the fingernails of the victims, right? Touch DNA on the clothing or on the body. Some of that removed from the body will be the job of the pathologist, all right? The clothing will be taken by crime scene, and that'll be all the evidence from that will be collected by crime scene. So you can see how complicated this can really get. And then any potential evidence that's collected during the autopsy, for example, DNA evidence, has to, of course, be processed correctly so the DNA can go to the proper place to be identified. Now, who better than to collect and categorize and send the DNA to a correct location than a pathologist, a medical doctor? Can any attorney tell the doctor, oh, you didn't do that right? You know? Oh, really? Jacoby and Myers, I think I did do it right, you know? I just gave a plug to Jacoby and Myers. And then anyway, I said that as sort of a little joke. But
Joe Murray's not going to like that.
yeah, Joe Murray won't like that. But so it's very difficult, but yet the defense will hire their own experts to try to create doubt on the work that a pathologist, a professional medical doctor, will do in collecting this evidence and drawing out. We talked about the anatomical diagrams they do, which will indicate all the stab wounds and the location on the body and whether the stab wounds were in fact fatal or not fatal. And they can tell which ones were fatal. Jolie Up, thank you. Great show. First timer. Thank you, Jolie Up. Welcome. Cynthia Gaines, thank you for the $5 super chat. AB and coroner weren't being respectful of the victims, in my opinion. Cynthia Gaines, I think that, I don't think they meant to be disrespectful, but there was no way that coroner should have been interviewed 4 days after the murders. No way. Jeannie Nash, thank you so much for the $2 super chat. Vicky O'Quinn, enjoyed being here. It looks like you're a member of our of our YouTube family. Anyway, so the pathologist is so important. And another thing I just wanted to point out, because many of the people that are working on this, the investigators, the detectives, the FBI, the state police, some are very experienced, some are not. The lead detective on this case happens to not be that experienced. That person is going to spend a lot of time learning and being taught by the pathologist. This is what happened. And the pathologist will explain everything to that detective. And that detective should have attended all 4 of these autopsies. If he didn't, that's a huge mistake by the police department. But he should have been at every single one of these autopsies. Tough for a 2 or 3 year veteran of a police department to go to 4 autopsies of 20 and 21-year-old kids. Really tough to do.
Yeah, but it's what's expected of the assigned investigator. I think you're making a good point, Billy, that he should have attended all 4 of those just to know the details of what took place. Very, very important to figure out, the exact crime scene, to read the crime scene. Once you're inside the location, you're going to get a good picture of what took place based on everything that you see. Now, when you go to the autopsy the next day, the post, you're going to be able to confer with the medical examiner and talk about, what was the wounds that caused the person to expire? How long could the person have been conscious based on these wounds? Could it have been that there was a tremendous struggle or a fight? Could the person have lived for an extended period of time before they expired? All of those questions would be answered at autopsy. And one last thing I wanted to bring up about crime scene experts that the prosecution will be working with. They're going to want to explain how the evidence is recovered, specifically that sheath. That sheath is going to be very, very important to the whole case, because obviously that sheath contained DNA evidence on it that matched Bryan Kohberger's dad. It linked to the dad. It wasn't a match to the dad. It was a link to the dad. It was familiar DNA, which eventually I am sure that a copy of Bryan's DNA was taken, a sample of his DNA was taken and compared to that DNA that was recovered from the sheath, and I'm certain it's going to wind up being a match. So again, how was that sheath handled? Where was it recovered? You're going to have pictures and you're going to have video that's going to be shown to the jury, and now you're going to have a crime scene expert that can explained, this is where it was found. This is how we handled it. We swabbed the whole sheet, and we swabbed the snap specifically for DNA, and we were successful. We did recover DNA, and that went to the lab, and from the lab it went to the familiar DNA, the searches on the public sites that led to Bryan Kohberger's father, and 99.9% chance that it was the father of the DNA that was recovered off of that sheet. Now he's taken into custody, and that DNA does match his. That's one of the things I think will have to be explained. And then you have the bloody footprint. We're going to establish how it got there by DM. I talked about that. That would be in the open. Perhaps later on in closing statements, the DA may bring that up and say, we did recover a bloody footprint at the rear door with the foot facing the door as if to be exiting. Now we're going to remind you that DM testified that she saw him walk out that door, the perpetrator. She saw a mask.
Phil, I just want to interrupt you for 1 second. This sheath that you see on the screen right now is not the sheath. It's a sheath that is similar to the one that they recovered. You could see it's for a K-bar U.S. Marine Corps knife. And where the DNA was recovered was on the button, the snap of the sheath. All right. I just did this so that you could see it and understand it, but it's not the sheath that was recovered.
Bill, leave that up there for a second. I just want to make one other comment about it. Now, obviously, most people, it's kind of self-explanatory, but for people that don't understand where that DNA was recovered from, the knife would slip into that sheet, and then the top part where the black thing is would snap over one side, and then the top would be the snap that would close it and hold it in place. So that snap is where it's almost like a button. That snap is where they recovered the DNA that matched Bryan Kohberger's dad. Very, very important to the case. Again, that's not the sheath, but that's a similar one. And a K-bar knife is obviously a very vicious weapon. It's used by the Marine Corps. Some hunters will use those type of knives. So again, very, very deadly weapon.
I want to play a little bit of this. We'll remove us from here.
Those 4 students were so brutally murdered is and will remain a crime scene for some time as investigators continue to build their case against accused killer 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger. Over the last couple of days, those investigators have been removing more items from this house. Those items included mattresses, and you'll remember, of course, that at least some of those students were killed as they slept in their beds. Forensics experts talking to Fox say that investigators will likely gain a whole lot more DNA evidence from this scene. Listen here.
And it's not just blood. We're talking about any kind of touch DNA, like dead skin cells that are sloughing off. You also have hair transfer, fiber transfer. All of these things are going through. And here's key. If he has blood on him, he's going to contact the surfaces that he's walking on and touching. Powerful evidence.
Bryan Kohberger, meantime, remains in the county jail just a couple of miles from the house. He made his first court appearance, of course, last Thursday. He will make another appearance this coming Thursday. That, though, is just a status hearing. We are unlikely to learn much more about the case against him. In the meantime, University of Idaho students will be returning to Moscow for...
Well, obviously that was early on in the investigation when this was made. But one of the reasons I wanted to play that was you saw the investigators carrying those mattresses out of the house, right? That is also evidence that the defense attorney will use to show, oh, is this the proper way to process a bed? Throwing it in the back of a pickup truck did you clean that pickup truck? Was the bed of the pickup, so they will come with all ways that evidence could have been contaminated. How do we know there wasn't DNA in the bed of that pickup truck? So,
you know what, Billy? I think that perhaps they collected whatever DNA evidence they thought. Maybe they cut out the blood stains that were on it, but now they want to bring that mattress into court and use it as a prop, so to speak, to show where this piece of evidence came from. I think it's going to be powerful to do that. Again, though, like you said, a good defense attorney is going to bring up all types of inconsistencies. Was that a bed of that pickup truck? Was it cleaned out beforehand, and could it have been cross-contaminated? And they'll go through all of that stuff.
Absolutely. JD Driscoll, thank you for the $10 super chat.
Thank you.
Coda's question: does your DNA go into the system when someone is arrested, or not until convicted? When they're arrested, I mean, in this case, to cover themselves, they would get a search warrant to collect his DNA so that it's all 100% legit, and that there's not going to be the defense trying to get it disqualified later on. They would actually get a judge's order to take his DNA from him.
I believe in New York State, Billy. If you're convicted of specific crimes, I think most felonies and some misdemeanors, when you are shipped off to corrections, when you're going to do your jail time, that's when you'd have to turn over a DNA sample. Again, though, there are some cases when you're arrested, if it's a sexual crime, they may get a search warrant to do it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. And, a lot of times in investigations, we would try to get a defendant to give us his DNA voluntarily. And we would actually have a form that he would sign and agree to it. And that passed muster in court, believe it or not. And it was perfectly legitimate. I know a lot of folks, they hear that. Oh, how is that voluntary? You asked him for his DNA? And the other way we can get DNA is, class, do you remember the word?
Surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously, we can get DNA from someone by following them. They drink out of a cup. We take the cup. They drink out of a water bottle. They discard something they were eating. There's a way to surreptitiously collect DNA.
I remember there was a case where they took chewing gum. A guy spit out a piece of chewing gum. They took the chewing gum. They were able to recover DNA from the chewing gum. Completely held up in court. He discarded it. It became garbage at that point, and there was no, right to privacy on the discarded piece of gum.
Absolutely. Folks, we were talking about, so all of the work that the medical examiner has done on this case regarding the autopsies and collecting the evidence, none of that is out yet. None of that potentially could it have been handed over to the defense already? Yeah, it's a possibility. It could have been handed, but we don't know about it. The gag order from this judge in this case, if it was handed over, we don't know about it. But that, I believe, is going to be, we talk smoking gun. If his blood evidence, his blood DNA is in this crime scene, it's all over. It's over. I don't care if you get 20 attorneys. How are they going to explain that?
Absolutely, Billy. I mean, we don't know that it was blood DNA or touch DNA just on the sheet alone. Now, you and I talked about beforehand, before we went on the air, that that probable cause warrant that was issued to the Pennsylvania judge to arrest Bryan and bring him back to Idaho, probably only, a small percentage of what evidence there was recovered against him. We thought, we just threw a number out there, maybe 10%. It seemed like a lot of stuff was in that probable cause warrant, that affidavit. So that tells me that there's probably a ton more of evidence. And, it's almost a 100% chance that his blood is going to be mixed in there someplace in that house, or perhaps, a droplet of sweat, skin cell DNA, all of those things that we've talked about in the past.
I'd like to read this. Mab investigates. Mab, thank you for the 99-cent super chat. What did the kids do for 3 to 4 hours before the cops were called? The defense will tear this up. How can the crime scene be pristine with all those kids cleaning up whatever was in the house? Drugs. Well, we don't know that. I think the defense will have to be very, very gentle with DM, or the jury will not like that at all. DM is a eyeball witness. She's traumatized. Yeah, we all can question what happened. Why did she not call, or why did someone not call 911 until, how many hours later? I mean, yeah, that seems, I don't know how that's explainable. the prosecution is going to have to explain that away some way. And you're right, MAB Investigates. That's a trump card potentially for the defense.
You know, Billy, I'm going to go out on a limb and try and explain a little bit what I think possibly could be. She hears a noise. She's half asleep. We don't know if she had been drinking or not. Maybe she thought it was some type of a prank. She retreats back to her room. She falls asleep. And then once they wake up in the morning, 11, whatever it is, before they call 911, knocking on the doors, trying to find, perhaps seeing one of the victims bloody, starts to put it together at that point. I don't think there's going to be a very horrible reason why she didn't call. I don't think she was involved in it. I think that's clear. The police have said that she was the other two roommates that were home were not involved in the murder, or that's what they believe. So again, I don't think there's going to be some nefarious reason why she didn't call the police or alert anyone. It does sound suspicious, 100%. It sounded suspicious from the minute I heard it, but perhaps there is a logical reason why. And the only one, and I've said this before, that can really explain that is DM. And I am sure that she will give an explanation when she's called to testify at the trial.
Schmitty, I hope they wouldn't do a voice lineup. DM is probably in a constant state of doubting herself, not reliable. Schmitty, I agree with you. And we spoke the other night on why. I compared it to why police departments don't do gunshot residue tests on people, because it's an absolute, right? What if the person who shot somebody cleaned their hands real quick before the police got there? Is there going to be gunshot residue on the hands? No. And don't think perpetrators don't know this stuff, right? So if the police test for gunshot residue and it's not present, does that mean this person is not the shooter? Conversely, with a voice lineup, if she can't pick out the voice, does that mean the person that did it, that actually said that, potentially Bryan Kohberger, does that mean he's not guilty? So it's a big risk to take, and the police won't take that risk by doing a voice lineup.
Well, as we've established earlier on in other shows, and we talked about it earlier today, Bill, we don't know who uttered those words. Do we believe it was Bryan Kohberger? I think, based on just, common sense to me, that yes, excuse me, it does seem like it was Bryan Kohberger that uttered those words. But again, it may have been whispered. It may not have been very loud, hard for her to hear, state of panic. Thinking about it now, completely traumatized, it would probably be very difficult to do a voice analysis. And again, not very reliable at this point, I would say.
Lula Morocco, as Michael Vecchione said, if DM takes the stand the first day, the jury will be more empathetic. Very powerful. Lula, absolutely. And I think, you can take that from a former prosecutor who said that she's the first person he's putting on the stand. It's probably a good idea too, because she was so traumatized and is so traumatized by this. Let's get it over with. Let's get her on the stand right away, and let's get this over with. Let's get her testimony out there, and let's make sure she's prepared to testify also.
Don't forget, Billy, I am sure that the prosecutor would probably categorize her as a survivor of a quadruple homicide. She was in the home present, as well as the other person. That person may also be called to testify, even though that person didn't see anything. That person was present in the house. That present wasn't injured, wasn't hurt. They may be asked about what was going on in the house prior to, what type of lifestyle. Again, putting a face to the victims in this case. And I think that that's going to be very, very important. And, the fact that you have these two surviving victims, that's going to be something that the prosecution is going to label, and that's going to stick in the jury's mind. This is a survivor. This is a person that could have very easily been killed like the other four. So I think that also puts them in the category of a victim, and it's going to show sympathy towards that person. That's just human nature, Bill.
Absolutely. Joseph Connor, something? Very good point. She would have recognized if it was Ethan's voice, in my opinion. I agree with you, Joseph.
That's what we've been saying.
I 100% agree with you. I wish you were on the other night when Michael Geary said he thinks it wasn't Bryan Kohberger's, it was Ethan Chapin's voice. You're 100% right. I agree with you. That's
You know what? Listen, it's how everybody sees it in their mind. When I heard, I listened to the show after you guys did the show the other night, and I disagreed with that. I was by myself when I was listening, but I definitely disagreed with that. I believe it was Kohberger, perhaps as one of the victim who was struggling to stay alive. He uttered those words very cynically. I don't think it would have been Ethan as well, because again, she probably would have recognized that voice. Joe Murray, attorney at law. Have you found yourself in a jam? Are you in need of legal counsel in the New York area? Do you need a victim's advocate? Well, Joe Murray is your man. He's not only an experienced trial attorney, he's also a retired 15-year member of the NYPD. He literally knows both sides of defense. His website is jmurray-law.com. His telephone number is 646-838-1702, or you could email Joe at joe@jmurray-law.com. Joe is a big supporter of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, and he is a very qualified criminal defense attorney.
And there's a little picture of Joe. What do you want from me? That's what he's saying right there. All right. I wonder if he's watching. I don't know if he'd appreciate that, but that's sort of funny.
Nah, he's got a good sense of humor. He's okay, Joe.
He sure does.
Yeah, he's good people.
So, folks, one of the things I meant to mention before was that with this sheath here, one of the things, part of the investigation should be potentially, where did he buy this sheath? Where did he buy this K-bar knife? That's why you have to do a financial background check on the perpetrator, on Bryan Kohberger. Could he have used his credit card? Could he have used his debit card? Could he have went into a store? Could he have ordered this online at an Amazon? So if they can come up with a receipt for this and show that he bought this exact knife in this sheath, bingo. Very powerful piece of evidence.
100%, Billy. I think that's being done. And if it's not, it should be. Again, they put it out early on that it was a K-bar knife. Perhaps he could have bought it in a flea market at a yard sale. Again, maybe someone is seeing this and it sparks their attention and they could remember. Perhaps they had a video on their house and they can put Bryan Kohberger at the scene if it's a yard sale or something like that. There's so many possibilities, but that definitely has to be looked into. I would just hope and pray that it was an Amazon order or something of that nature, or perhaps we noted in the area of Moscow, there were 3 different hunting stores that sold hunting and fishing supplies, stuff like that. So again, one of those outdoor stores, perhaps there is a receipt. Even if he paid cash, we can get a video of him inside the store. All of those things, I believe, were being done. There was early on talk about how the police interviewed those 3 stores. So perhaps there is a video that exists of him purchasing a knife or something to that effect. That also would be slam dunk evidence. If you couple that with the knife, with his DNA being found at the scene, I think it's an open and shut case right there.
Bryan Kohberger's public defender filed a request for discovery in court. According to the American Bar Association, this is the formal process of exchanging information between the prosecution and the defense about witnesses and evidence they'll represent at trial. In that request, they asked for 18 things, including a list of potential witnesses, police reports, and evidence. State law requires the prosecution to respond. On January 23rd, the Latah County Prosecutor's Office confirmed it fulfilled that request. New court documents show the state sent the defense police reports and documents, including 995 pages, 1 audio-video file, and a number of photos. Former Idaho Attorney General Dave Leroy told KTVB this exchange of evidence is fairly standard. He says what makes this response unique is the large amount of evidence to sort through, considering the pretrial process only recently begun. Discovery requests ensure both sides have access to the same evidence attorneys will use to craft their arguments either for or against Kohberger. The discovery process is ongoing. Latah County's prosecuting attorney confirmed they'll give the defense any new information discovered in the upcoming months. As for what's next, Leroy expects the state to request a discovery back from the defense. He says the state will most likely ask for similar material and information the defense may use in the courtroom. Kohberger waived.
So the defense, this is the most recent, they said they have nothing to offer the state, which I would imagine is pretty standard. I don't think most defense attorneys are going to say, oh, yes, we have all of this inculpatory evidence, against our client. There's no way they're going to hand that stuff over. But Mike Geary explained it a little differently the other night, since he is an
You know what?
attorney.
The position that the defense usually takes is, and they don't have to prove innocence. They just have to doubt the evidence that's put forward beyond a reason. They want to come, to a doubt. They don't want anything that's going to be seen or construed as beyond a reasonable doubt. So they're going to see what is put forth by the prosecution and try to impeach testimony, try to knock down credibility of evidence. I think that's the tack that they're going to take at this point, only because it seems like there is a mountain of evidence. I don't think they're going to find any smoking gun inculpatory evidence at this point. I doubt that very highly. However, if they did come up with something, they do have the obligation to turn it over to the prosecution, so that way prosecution has a chance to evaluate and figure out how they're going to challenge whatever it is they're going to bring into court and say that this is an exculpatory piece of evidence, whether it be a video of him in another location or something of that nature, which I doubt even exists.
Some of the whole focus of this tonight was we're talking about what the prosecution is doing now to firm up their case, to tighten up their case. And some of the things they have to revisit is to revisit the victimologies of each and every one of these victims, to talk to their friends, families. Is there anything that they forgot to ask? Is there anything that the victims' families and friends know that will help the prosecution in this case? So the detectives have to continuously be out there pounding the pavement, crossing their T's, dotting their I's, and making sure that they close every little loophole that the defense could go into to try and create doubt. One of we think the strongest pieces of evidence in this case, besides if there is blood DNA, and we don't know that yet, but the phone work is so, and you see people make light of that. Oh, what does it mean that he was reconning the house 12 times? What does it mean? I think it's pretty damn strong evidence, right? What does it mean that
it goes to motive? It goes right to motive.
Right, it goes right to motive, although you don't have to prove motive. The jury loves to hear that. 12 times he's there, the night, the early morning of these murders. How convenient that he turned his cell phone off at 2:30 en route to the location. How convenient that he turned it back on after the murders were completed. How about coming back to the scene at 9 o'clock in the morning? Now the phone's on. Now he's back to the scene. Is that damaging evidence? I think so. You know how many murderers like to go back to the scene of their crime? They get a thrill out of it, and he went back to the scene. So all of this phone work has to be explained not by the case detective, by a phone expert,
right?
By an expert from whoever the carrier is, whoever is the expert that the prosecution hires, that is the cell phone, that is the cell site expert, whoever is, maybe the FBI has an expert in geofencing, which we were probably the first and only podcast to mention geofencing during this whole investigation. And geofencing is an electronic technology that can pull up every single electronic device being used in a certain area at a specific time. That's unbelievable evidence. But we need an expert to explain that. I couldn't explain it. No way. Phil couldn't explain it. So they need an expert. And then guess what? The defense is going to hire an expert witness to refute what the prosecution's expert just said.
Billy, I sat in on a trial back in 2018 or 2019 where there was a lot of cell phone evidence. It was a murder trial. There was a lot of cell phone evidence put forward. Now, what happens is the carrier comes in with their expert and says, I'm the technician that recovered this cell phone information. They kind of lay out what it is that they turned over. In this case, it was the FBI. They turned it over to the FBI. Then the FBI will bring in their expert and they will say, based on the information, and I'll use Verizon as an example. I don't know that it's Verizon, but I'm just going to use that as an example. Verizon turned over this information to us. This information shows, and it gives specific technology markers that show the phone was at this location, pinging to this cell site. A phone call was made, which gave an exact location here at this location. And then we're going to take that information that expert's going to testify to, and we're going to tie it in with video at the same time, because we're going to have specific times. It goes to 0407 and 42nd hours, and you're going to have a video that's going to coincide with that exact timing. So again, all of that needs to be explained. It's not just, the prosecution doesn't say, okay, we picked up his cell phone at this location at this time. No, it's not that simple. It has to be show how did the law enforcement recover the evidence they're going to put forward? We got it from the cell phone carrier. They bring the cell phone carrier in. They have the expert that works for the cell phone carrier that recovered the information from their computers, now turned it over to law enforcement. Then we have the second part of it. Law enforcement now has to state what they gave to me. This is what it means. This is what it deciphers. Here's the map. Here's the location of the cell towers. Here's the location when the call was being made. Here's, they may go back months into the cell phone technology, the cell phone data of Kohberger to see, did he ever turn his cell phone off in the 6 months prior or a year prior, whatever it is? And the answer may be no. And then we're going to say, oh, but at 2:47 a.m. on the day of the murder, the cell phone was turned off and it wasn't turned back on until 4:53 a.m. or whatever the exact timing was. So those are the things that have to be explained.
Pauline Buckles, Kohberger has no money, though. So who's going to pay for the experts? You are.
Exactly.
You and me. The taxpayer will pay for them. Legal aid has, they'll spend the money. Believe me.
They have an obligation, because if they don't provide the defense that everything needs to be covered, then they can get an overturned conviction later on down the line, because Kohberger can go to court and say, well, my defense team didn't look at this evidence that was recovered from the phone company that I wanted to contradict it, and it wasn't done because I didn't have the money. Again, maybe grounds for
that's the argument is that people always say, oh, the government has unlimited funds, they can just and in the case usually of the federal government, that's true. They can exhaust defendants and just break people and make people totally broke to try to prove to fight the government. But I don't think
a judge in a capital murder case I'm sure that they would make an application to the judge and say, if there was they needed more, investigators to look at this stuff, and the judge will make the call and say, listen, we have to do this. They have to get somebody that works with legal aid to investigate this stuff, whether it be an interview of some person or an interview of an expert on cell phone technology, whatever it is, it'll get done.
One of the things I wanted to just briefly talk about, and I thought about it in depth, and we've all watched all the talking heads and all the content creators on YouTube, and we've seen a lot of these behavioral analysts, mostly from the FBI. And I was thinking about, would that come into play in the trial? And my thoughts are no. I don't think the prosecution will want that, because guess why? And some of you may not like what I'm going to say, because it's junk science. It really is junk science. And I've seen some really impressive behavioral analysts. I've seen some PhDs that were very impressive. But guess what? Their science is unproven. So I don't think in a court of law, it would really help the prosecution at all. So that, I think, is not going to be a factor. What I think I'm trying to get a lot more in this. We're already into 1 hour and 8 minutes. Brian's movements before, months before, years before even of these horrific murders. What was his routine? What did he do? We know that he was a doctoral student at the Washington State University. What were his interactions? Where did he go out at night? What was that? All of that stuff is really important. Building what we call in the canonisms is perpology. We want to know about him. And I'm not going to call it behavioral analysis, because I don't think that will specifically help in this case. But looking into his background, looking into his habits, the car. How about the car? The white Hyundai. That is like a tremendous piece of evidence. People lose they lose sight of that. That was a car that was registered in Washington State, all of a sudden he changes the plates to Pennsylvania. You know, I think that could be viewed as what Mike Geary says is consciousness of guilt.
Absolutely, Billy. And listen, we talked about the experts that will have to testify as to how did they figure out from a quick video that was a Hyundai Elantra 2011 to 13. It turned out to be a 14, I believe. So again, that technology that exists where they enhanced the video footage and they were able to say with pretty conclusive to a conclusive degree that it was a Hyundai Elantra. They were off by 1 year, but they were pretty right on it. Again, they weren't able to get the plate number, but they were able to figure out what car it was that was speeding by or picked up on a video. And again, video technology today is rather good. There's high definition video and stuff, but a moving object is not that easy to figure out what it is. They were able to do that. So that expert would be brought on. There's so many other different things with regard to what the prosecution is going to be putting forward. Even the DNA technology is going to have to be explained. We went through all of that.
But, Phil, with the car, they had the video of him pulling up slowly around the house and parking behind the house. That was
Right.
a slow pan of the car. So I think that's the video that initially identified the car. And then the video of the car going past that gas station. I think
Right.
that solidified the identification. All right. So, listen, I think it's time, Phil. I think you do it every night. I think it's a great thing is to mention the names of.
I really want to do that because I didn't get their names earlier. The victims in this case: Madison Mogan, 21; Kaylee Gonzalez, 21; Xana Knodel, 20; and Ethan Chapin, 20. Let their souls rest in peace. And the families, forgive me, I didn't get their names before. I was a little tripped up on it, but I got it now. And God bless their souls and just keep their families in your thoughts and prayers. Those people have been through some tremendous, tremendous traumatic experience. Nothing is ever going to give them closure. They're just going to hope for justice in this case. And I believe we are going to get it.
Absolutely. Folks, I just want to thank everyone for coming by, especially all you folks that were watching Duty Ron's channel and came over to check us out. I really appreciate you guys. Again, if you like true crime, real crime from a police perspective, you're in the right place. We try to give it to you the way it happens, and do we make mistakes? Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes we make mistakes and we're not infallible, but when we make mistakes, we'll admit to it. We'll admit that we erred on something, We try
But one last thing I wanted to mention, I don't mean to cut you off, but when we were talking about his background, what was he doing on his social media? Who was he talking to? What was he chatting about? There might be a treasure trove of evidence that might be pertinent to this investigation just in his social media.
100%. So, folks, again, we appreciate you guys coming by, and there's a million angles we could look at this case. But sometimes when I do read the chat, and people think that there's not that much evidence against him, he's going to beat this case. Look, everyone can have their opinion, but I think that there's a lot more evidence to come, and there's a lot more that we're going to hear about from the prosecution. Folks, have a great night. God bless, and we'll see you soon.
Stay safe, everyone.
One episode just